for those in the audience who don't know Reid, and I suppose there are a few of you, Reid is obviously best known perhaps as the co-founder of LinkedIn, but he became a partner at Greylock in 2009, joined the Microsoft board in 2017 when it acquired LinkedIn. He's a prolific author, and I have to say, I am the recipient of some customized AI customized versions of his latest books, which I treasure. I probably should have brought them to show you a few pictures on screen. They're so much fun. But he's also the host of the Masters of Scale podcast and conference. But he's also one of the most thoughtful observers of the tech scene. You know, he has a deep knowledge of history, economics, and technology, but also a deeply philosophical and deeply caring view of the world. And that's, where I think, while we often disagree about various things, we also we share that fundamentally optimistic commitment to having technology make the world a better place for everyone. And Reid has really been a force for good in the world, and is a dear friend. So,
and Tim didn't mention all the different things I've learned from him, but yes.
So let's start with Reid, the investor. You are one of the leading AI investors. Can you talk about some of your notable investments, why you made them, what you've learned, and what particular areas do you think will be, especially fruitful, both not just for entrepreneurs and investors, but also for, companies, existing companies that might say, oh yeah, we want to actually, bring AI to bear in our market.
So let's see. I think that there is, call it a pattern, 3 different kind of patterns of investment. And I'm, there's a bunch of people who do AI infrastructure and that kind of stuff, and chips and so on. I think those are all, potentially good to do, hard areas to invest in, but potentially feasible. I don't do them. The areas that I kind of focus on. So, I led the first commercial round in OpenAI. So some of the early things, just kind of the raw technology bets, I think are still, actually, in fact, I think not over yet. I think now if you said, hey, I'm going to try to build OpenAI from X years behind and do scale transformers, convolutional neural networks, et cetera, and I'm just going to go along that path, that's obviously, that ship has sailed, a little bit like trying to start a search engine, search index, years later and doing it. But I do think that there's still areas for kind of fundamental models. I mean, I think the kind of thought that this particular large language models are the only models that matter is actually an illusion, in part because if you look at how diffusion models and how LLMs come together. And so there's some very early stealth things on that I've tried, that I'm kind of working on. Next area, I think, is what is most common and valuable, which is a stack of different kinds of interesting, kind of applications. The one that I think is most interesting, even though a lot of people are doing it, is coding acceleration. But there's also like work productivity, customer service. I've invested in a couple of companies doing, kind of the customer service area. Because I think here, part of what the lesson is at a high line is that while technology, new, kind of disruptive things change kind of the landscape of what a business model might be or what a go-to-market might be, they still have a lot of the same principles of businesses. Like, what's the way that you kind of put your market ecosystem together? How do you go to market? Do you have network effects? Do you have enterprise integration? Do you have competitive moats in the various ways that you engage with the market and the customers and in the ecosystem and competitors? And so I think there's a whole bunch of different application areas, a bunch of which Greylock has invested in, a few of which I have as well. And then the last, and I was kind of buzzing through the first 2 because I think the third one is to some degree the most interesting, and which is like what I'm doing with Manas and Sid Mukherjee, which is, if you take the kind of the overall angle that there's this like, oh, the model is just going to do everything and it's just going to be awesome. I actually think that look, it's good, it's going to be awesome, but it's not going to do everything. And so when I was looking at what I thought some of the most prominent blind spots for LLMs are that are still accelerated by LLMs, it's those kind of almost contrarian things. Like, for example, for Manas, we are creating a drug discovery factory being AI native, which requires reinventing the process of how you identify targets, how you go through the validation of them, what's the way that you do your testing. You obviously still have to go through FDA, which is one of the big challenges in navigations. But like, it's not like you add a little AI to the current drug discovery process. It's actually you reinvent what you're doing. And I think there's a number of different things like that. And LLMs are very helpful, but you actually also have to cobble together different models and technologies in different ways in order to make it work.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's very much matches our experience at O'Reilly. I gave a talk recently called "Grappling with the Bitter Lesson at AI," which was really a reflection on how the progress of technology challenges many of our assumptions, and how I've been working with our team not just to sort of basically use AI to accelerate our current process, but to think about how AI could replace or transform our process. And if you look forward on the path of AI and what it's going to be able to do, you accept that it's not perfect now, but it's going to get better. And then you say, okay, assuming it gets better, what will be our defensible moat in the future based on that, rather than trying to hold back the tide? And so it's a really interesting time for business strategy, and for all of us who are executives in existing companies who are trying to understand how to harness AI and also not get run over by it. So anyway,
by the way,
I don't know if you have any further advice on that topic.
Well, here's the thing I would say. The mistake that people frequently make is, like, for example, there's a relatively silly MIT paper published in the last 4 or 5 months, which was, hey, 95% of the enterprise proof of concept things with AI failed. This is an unworkable technology. And you're like, yeah, when an enterprise goes, hey, these 4 people are going to go do a little proof of concept on the side here. That's not the promise of this. If you look at all the startups are being massively productivity enhanced with this. So what it means is that it's a reworking of the work process. And by the way, that could be a reworking of the business model, which is always one of the hardest ones, and part of the, implicit things like, Clay Christensen did the Innovator's Dilemma, which is obviously a magnificent piece of work, but it was like on a technology replacement, but like technology replacements are only one of the kind of transformations. Sometimes there's market transformations, sometimes there's business model transformations. There's these things, and you have to look at which of these things AI might be doing, and you have to rework your work process for that. And that's much harder for enterprises to do. And so, by the way, A, hard. B, the way you start doing it is roughly just get everyone to start using it. Like, one of the things that I really recommend to organizations is to say, look, you have a weekly meeting, make the weekly meeting a little bit longer and have everyone identify in their work for that particular organization business what they tried new last week to use AI to do in order to help, what they learned from it, including negative lessons, to be kind of doing the search for, well, what's the ways that we should be doing this, right? For our particular business edge, our particular business, our place in the market.
Yeah, FG comments in the Q&A, that was not the conclusion of the MIT paper. The conclusion was the lack of understanding of AI, which of course is really this point. Things are not working because people aren't, really figuring out how to apply it. They're just doing what we were just talking about, which is trying to put what does the Bible say? New wine into old bottles.
Yes. I was being a little harsh, but that's still the same point.
Yeah. All right. But before we leave this topic, MR asks, what are your thoughts on smaller, more conversational and router/agent local LLMs versus super large models that may or may not achieve super intelligence? And obviously, this is related to our conversation earlier about the OpenAI. This is backstage conversation, I should say, about OpenAI as sort of like a recap of the Windows model. Big platform. You call its APIs. It is in fact the operating system of AI, versus what MCP looks more like the web to me, Anthropic's vision is we're going to have a network of cooperating AIs that could be using totally different models.
So I think the answer was going to be both, and in different ways. And so I think there's a bunch of different uses for the very big models, and they will figure out how to run them more cheaply. But because I think the expense of running them will go up super linearly, you'll eventually get to the point where when you're running the large model, you'll only want to run it on things where that super linear cost makes a difference. Now, part of what I think large models will do will actually distill to a set of small models. And you see an anchor of that already in what GPT-5 is doing, which is to have routing, right? Which you kind of go, okay, is this a cheap one or expensive one, even in the cloud? Now, that being said, I do think there's roles for local models. I've been kind of playing with myself because one of the funny little coincidences, not non-coincidence, but like thing is the OpenAI standard laptop is the highest end Mac laptop. So the 20 billion parameter open model works on it. So I got one of those laptops. I put it on it. I'm playing with it in order to see what the value of having a local model is and what are the different things you do. And I think many of the things that people say about having a local model, like, well, it keeps all your data, personal and private, I don't think is ultimately that decisive an idea. But by the way, having it be able to run 24/7 and selectively call larger services and so forth, I think that's a potentially interesting thing for kind of how they can work. I think that the fact you would give it all direct access to everything on your computer, which is kind of running it as a kind of a front end to that is, I think, useful. Being able to run in a disconnected environment is also interesting and useful in some environments. So I think there is a set of different things for the kind of edge compute, but it's not. But there's going to be a lot of very effectively efficient models. Think about like GPT-5 and other agentic modes that are running in the cloud because they also have access to all of these different services in the web, and that's part of like low cost, highly optimized models in Suite, in MCP, and a collaboration network will be there too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to switch to a different topic. We've been talking about some macro issues. But in the description of this event, I actually, I kind of advertised that we were going to talk about the idea of how to use AI to advance your career. You've written, I urge you not to think of in terms of AI proofing your career, instead AI optimize it. So could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. So the thing that people are trying, like the frame that people want to naturally go to is the AI proof is like, hey, I can keep doing my same job, and now I just know the AI to do it. But since AI is going to be changing how a lot of jobs operate, that's like saying, kind of like, I'm going to keep doing my horse and buggy, but I'm going to put an engine in the horse and buggy as opposed to a car, right? And what you need to do is go, okay, look, I'm going to switch over to the car, and then I got to find out what the best work and job to do is doing that. And so AI optimizing is to say, is to say, hey, like for example, say you're doing sales or marketing, don't say, hey, like, shit, we're going to have a sales agent that's going to be, it'll be following the curve that customer service agents are currently doing, because if you look at some of the leading edge of where clear replacement will be, it's in customer service, and they already have some pretty amazing activity on that. Is to say, well, how would I be using AI to be much better at navigating this whole sales process, giving this anticipated curve within the improvement of kind of sales capabilities. And to give a lens to that, as an example, one of the things that we built relatively early, like 10 years ago, or maybe even 12, 15 years ago at LinkedIn, was the way that we empower our salespeople. We have salespeople. The way we empower them is we say, hey, Tim just came on the LinkedIn network. kind of O'Reilly Media could really use LinkedIn. Here's a PowerPoint deck, and here's some of the things you could tell him about how he could use LinkedIn if you reached out and talked to him about how to use LinkedIn and why he might want to, engage in the enterprise services of LinkedIn and that kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing to think about the strategy of, the execution of, and that kind of thing. And that's kind of like AI optimizing. It's like, how do I, because one of the things I think a lot of these AI systems, which are already super intelligent in some ways, but they lack a lot of kind of context awareness. It's one of the more entertaining things. I think we're going to get to some of our Tim and I both really like this. The deputy CTO, we like the CTO as well, but the deputy CTO at Microsoft, Sam Scalacci, and one of the things he's been doing for years has been running agents talking to each other at Microsoft, and they very frequently get into the no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you, and a month later, no, thank you, because they don't have that kind of context awareness, metacognition, and that's the kind of thing that you can be adding in to how you're doing it, and that's what AI optimization looks like. Is you say, hey, I learned how to add in my context awareness, my judgment, my other kinds of things to do this, and I adopt the superpowers that AI can give me in doing that, and then I have a much more compelling kind of job work. Whether I'm joining and getting a job or making my own work, I have a much more capable, a more stronger set of capabilities.
Yeah, and this isn't just when you're using AI interactively. It's also when you're thinking about AI tools like in programming. One of the things Sam talks about is he calls them metacognitive recipes. And I wrote a post which I published just today called Magic Words, and it's really around the idea that certain words bring a lot of context with them, and you see developers using these all the time. When you say, write out a .md file. .md file is a magic word. The LLM knows what you mean, and but you look at the workflow of even somebody who's vibe coding. They say, plan, and write out the plan into an MD file. Oh, then let's review the plan. Let's, and you start this execution loop, and then maybe you say. Get another LLM to review it, and then maybe you say, "Oh, this other LLM reviewed it. What do you think?" And there's all these magic words which you're using to control the process. And anyway, I wrote a little bit about that. But also, you even see applications that are really built around a magic word. I had a guest on here a little while ago, Claire Vaux, who has an application called Chat PRD. She's a product manager. A very good product manager, and she was using ChatGPT in her work. And one of the things you do as a product manager is you write PRDs, product requirement documents. That's a magic word. Any of you talk to ChatGPT or Claude and say, I have an idea, blah, 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 write a PRD for this. It comes out with something in a known expected format. That's a magic word. But Claire, but that's not good enough. I have been working on this. I've been improving it. And she built a whole app around it. So it interviews users about their requirements and various things, and then feeds it into this. So the magic word is part of a much bigger magic spell, which includes, prompting, context, some tools that you write that the model can call. And it's a whole different kind of application programming. And so again, AT, your question, you said, with everyone pretty much copying and pasting codes from LLM and agents, aren't we outsourcing critical thinking and everyone's opinions kind of the same? Yeah, if you're doing that, you're not doing it right. If you're doing it right, you're figuring out the things that LLMs can do, and you're going, okay, how do I make this better?
Yes, exactly. And that's part of the reason why, one, really start using it. And by the way, when you start using it, I'll give a personal example, because and it's actually related to both the career proofing and all the rest. So this Sunday, I participated in a debate, which was, call it within 10 years, AIs replace doctors. And what I did is I reframed this debate as, are we better off with doctors using AI or AI without doctors? Now, if the doctors don't adapt to how AI is going to be a much better knowledge store, expertise, reasoning engine than the vast majority of people in terms of medical conditions and diagnosis, then the AI without doctors is going to be better, because when the doctors, as per things, try to overrule the AI, they'll be wrong, right? But
Right.
when doctors learn the metacognition and go, great, I now don't have to remember all this stuff. I can
Yeah.
then use this and navigate it. You're going to be much better off when you have a doctor. There are obviously billions of people who don't, and so a medical assistant
Yeah.
just for them is a much better thing. But you're going to be much better off. Now, in using it, this is getting to it. I went to all the LLMs and I said, give me a set of arguments to argue my position of the AI without doctors, or AI with doctors, or doctors with AI. And they gave me basically kind of, I would think of B- arguments, because what they did is they went out and looked across a set of the different arguments, and it came up with like, well, you're going to need to have emotional hand-holding, and other kinds of things. You're like, well, I'm not sure how persistent that is if the AI is doing really well. So I had to go through and apply the kind of metacognition and think about it. I said, no, this is where the puck is moving towards. It's moving in this direction and this shape. And that's why there's actually still a really important role for human doctors. It is still doctors, not like, kind of emotional support doctors, animals, but like actual real role for what they're doing that involves expertise. Because like, for example, part of the expertise is, hey, the AI is saying this, like the AI says, you should start chemo tomorrow. But you're like, well, but actually this person really wants to walk their daughter down the aisle in 10 days. That's more important. They were willing to accept a percentage of risk in their life in order to do that. Let's help them navigate that for doing that. And that's part of like the expertise of navigating the AI and its recommendations for you, which is, like part of the doctor being a healer. And I think that kind of metacognition approach is part of what we're going to be seeing across all this, including coding.
There's a really important point that's in here, though, too, which is there's really a choice that organizations make. And that is, we have been on this path where the supreme goal, if you might say, as if we were machines, our objective function would be efficiency, and we're trying to make our businesses more efficient. And we all know how, for example, that has made healthcare worse. We used to have a family doctor who could sit down and talk with us, we had a real relationship, and then that became subsumed into corporate healthcare, where you got 5 minutes with the doctor, and that vanished. And there's a choice where you can say, oh, well, let's replace even the doctor with AI, or we can actually enable AI to do all the stuff that makes things more efficient, so the doctor and the other human caregivers can spend more time with the patient and more human time. And that's not inevitable. That is, in fact, a business choice. And I think that's part of the fundamental decision that any business deploying AI has to make. Are we simply saying, well, this is the path to make the system more machine-like, or is this the path to make the system more human-like and more human-friendly?
Yeah, and let me add a particular point to that, because I think this is one of the important things. This is part of what I've been telling a lot of different business people and government people. Is like, look, the natural thing in a lot of business is, a lot of efficiency, is cost cutting. So the very natural thing is say, how do we bring out as much cost out of the system as possible? It's part of the target of profits, a bunch of other things. That's not bad. It's a natural, and it's the least imaginative thing. And that's one of the reasons why people worry about kind of like, are there just going to be a whole bunch of jobs going away versus, I'm pretty sure, new jobs being created. Transition is still very much of a, how to navigate the transition is still very much of a deep and important issue we need to focus on. But what I want business people to focus on is think about how you make the service and product better. Like, how do you go, okay, I don't just have a cost-cutting thing in business, I also have a value increasing, right? And to do value increasing is another very good business thing. And it requires a little bit more invention, a little bit more creativity, but it's actually ultimately where we end up. That's part of it. It's not just a moral thing. It's you will be skating ahead of your competition if you do this.
Yeah, I agree. I wrote about that, we've been having this discussion for years. When I wrote my book, WTF, in 2017, we were having this same discussion about all the jobs that were going to go away. It hasn't happened yet. But I was also like, look around. Are we getting everything done that we think needs to be done? No, we're so far from that. There's so much to do. Why are we focused on the fact that this is going to replace things that we're doing today? But there are really issues, and JG is asking a little bit about that. He said, look, where will this AI race eventually lead to? We have one group highlighting the benefits, another group which predicts doomsday. But one thing we are all sure of, and I'm not sure that this is true, is that AI will eliminate jobs in almost every sector. It's easy to say people have to train themselves, but reality is different. For example, can you expect a taxi driver or software programmer who is 50 plus to learn new skills? All countries cannot give sustenance to the unemployed. Will this lead to major recession? What is the impact on the humans? So what's your take on that whole?
Well, let's see. So first is, I do think that the biggest challenge, people frequently talk about like, oh, all these entry level jobs are going away. I actually don't think that's the case, because I think all the organizations will need AI native people to help them refactor. So they'll be looking for AI native people, which generally be younger, maybe a different level of entry level. But I think the 50-year-old focus is exactly the right kind of thing, because as you get the transformation, you go, will they learn the transformation? And I think that's one of the things that's hard. Now, within that, like part of the thing that's I think beneficial about AI is that AI can not just be part of the changing way of workflows and all the rest, but can also be tools to help. Like one of the things I think is we want tools for people to go, okay, look, I'm a customer service person. I think that's one of the places where there'll be a lot of job replacement. Okay, what else can I do, right? And it's like, well, like have an AI talk to you and say, well, you got these skills and so on, and maybe this and maybe this and maybe this. Help you find those jobs, help you learn to do those jobs, best learning technology ever, help you do those jobs, right, et cetera, et cetera. And so AI is part of the solution. Now, part of that specific is like one way to kind of look at like, is it net down on jobs, is to go across all of the different functions in a corporation as a proxy. So customer service, I think, by the way, pure cost center. By the way, I think one of the things that will change is I actually think people will say, don't put on the human, put on the bot, because I can spend as much time, the bot will answer the phone within a second, as opposed to trying to defer people to how serious do you want to talk to me? You have to wait for 40 minutes in order to get there, et cetera, because we're trying to defer the cost center for it. Like, how serious do you want to have a conversation? Like, we're there right now. We're going to try to help and solve your problem. But when you go into like, say, marketing or sales, those are competitive functions between companies. So you go, well, initially, like I had 100 people in my marketing department. Now with AI, I can do the same job that I was doing before with 30. So isn't that just 70 jobs lost? You go, yeah, company one is competing with company two. And part of it is if they're not trying to figure out how to use the tools in different ways, I think it gets back up to maybe it's 80, maybe it's 100, maybe it's 120. It depends on what it is. Because of, but newly constituted in terms of what they're doing. So like, for example, the job that is, I'm doing the digital form entry for the marketing thing. It's like, that we're going to having AI do all that stuff. But like thinking about how to do marketing and interesting in different ways and to outcompete your competitors in marketing, you're still going to be hiring new people and doing that and making that work. And I think you look across a lot of functions, and that's what happened. And then, Tim, to your earlier points with like metacognition in software engineering, one of the things I think is most bozo bills, oh, we're not going to have software engineers anymore. It's like, no. That pattern of thinking is still really there, but you just have to apply that pattern. Like every software engineer is no longer an individual contributor. They deploy with a set of agents that they're managing in what they're doing exactly in the way that you described.
Yeah. Well, this if you look at history, there are two, things that happen during these kinds of industrial revolutions. We obviously look back at the original first industrial revolution for models. And I think one of the big risks, of course, is that the owners of capital basically take all the benefits for themselves. That's what really happened in the first industrial revolution. There was worker protests, people were immiserated. And then eventually they said, oh, actually, we can actually improve worker conditions. We'll actually reduce the working hours. We'll stop child labor. We'll have a healthcare. There were all these things that were, after 40 or 50 years, they kind of figured out that actually it did not work to create an underclass, who'd been replaced by the machines. And I think we do face that choice as a society, and as businesses. Because people are going to be making the choice to put people out on the street, and other people are going to be going, oh, wait a minute, we could actually, if this is making us more productive, we could pay people more. We could actually reduce working hours and keep more people on rather than having it be, just getting taking all the benefits for corporate profits. So there's a bunch of choices to make as businesses, I think, that are part of the answer to that. And there will be disruption. It's not like Pollyanna-ish, nothing, nobody will lose their job. But in general, my experience from being in technology for, 40 plus, 45 plus years has been that there are variations of this argument always, and they always turn out to be wrong.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I think, just as you were saying, the transitions will be challenging, right? Yeah. Because, what'll happen, and, I actually, like, for example, here's another way of looking at this. Like, one of the things going on, if you look at like deep research in AI models, one of the clearest, like, higher end functions that they massively amplify is research analyst. And so you say, hey, would I, as a venture capitalist, get rid of my research analyst? And the answer is no. But both the research analyst and I now do not do our jobs without using, the deep research function of multiple models. And by the way, the models are different, right? Like, I find, ChatGPT useful for some things, Gemini useful for some things, Claude useful for some things. Claude's better at code currently, although actually the reasoning of GPT-5 with Claude Code is the best way of kind of doing that. And so, like, we get massively amplified in terms of doing that. And because there's actually, really actually in terms of research, like, we only stop because of a cost curve relative to making decisions about how to be intelligent about how to do investments, how to allocate capital, et cetera. The fact that we're amplified doesn't cut down the number of people. It just makes the work a lot more in precision on risk and decisioning and all the rest. Now, that being said, if you're not using it, you're no longer capable of doing the job.
Yeah. I think, just looking very specifically at my field, which is, computer programming and teaching people about it, we've gone through this, paroxysm of doubt that, oh my God, that we won't need programmers anymore. The AIs are going to do it all. And what we're seeing instead is there's so much more to learn, and people have to get all these new skills in order to actually master this new superpower. And we have all these, I think we're starting to see new jobs and more people coming in to learn the skills of programming. And this is something that happened before. I mean, back in the days when people had to write machine code, by hand, and then we had these magic things called compilers, which could spit it out. And that wasn't programming anymore, right? You just wrote in this higher level language. And now we're talking to these things. Well, it's just that pattern higher up the spiral, Yeah. And anyway.
But by the way, there's actually an amplification there that I think is really important. Part of what I think is going to happen is, for all, call it knowledge work, high-end information work, I think everyone is going to be creating bespoke code. And it's the future of the vibe coding thing. So I actually think coding is going to become a much more general thing. So, like, for example, I think, research analysts, venture capitalists, journalists, academics, doctors, everyone else is going to have a kind of a co-pilot agent that's going to be helping them with forms of bespoke code. And if you want to wrap your head around it right now, I expect it's going to go a lot more than this, but it's just like scripting, right? It's kind of like the generation of the scripts to do stuff. But like coding is going to become much, much broader in terms of activity. And by the way, the high-end stuff of still doing really deep learnings, because, like, to your magic words, like, part of what is going to empower where really vibe coding is going to be going is a bunch of different libraries that part of what it is, select these different libraries, select these different calls for pulling that stuff together.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So MR says customer service at the moment is a disaster with AI. They're just trying to eliminate people, resulting in a much worse product. Now, I will say that's not my experience. I think it's true in a lot of places, but I think there are also places that are really working hard on how do you make customer service better. And certainly any company that's just using it to eliminate people isn't doing it right. Customer service has always been a disaster because it's a really hard problem to manage, often the massive information, bottlenecks that exist in our companies. I remember trying to transfer a 401k from one company to another once, and I had two humans on the phone for 2 hours from two different companies, and they ended up still giving me the wrong answer, and I had to do it over again. And so, the idea that you can have, an AI that really could manage some of this enormous complexity we built, I think is at the heart of the vision of a better customer service with AI. And anybody who is just using it to replace people to offer the same or worse service is going to be out of business, quite honestly.
100%. And by the way, this is what I look quite the opposite. I actually would anticipate, even as short as 2 to 3 years, people will start saying, put the bot on, please, because the bot is actually going to be much more helpful to me. One, it will answer the phone right away, or whatever the kind of the equivalent is. You don't have to wait for it, because part of the weights and queues are part of managing the cost curve and kind of thing. Two, it has access to all that information right away. Three, it's not trying to get you off the phone as fast as you possibly can. It's like, well, did we really solve your problem? Is there anything else you need help with? Et cetera, et cetera. I think all of that is part of what the future of that will be.
I think that's true in a lot of areas. In my family, we had a recent healthcare situation, and spending time, you get these lab reports, and they don't seem to have the time to explain them to you very well. But you feed them in to an LLM, and you get a pretty detailed explanation of what it means. And I found that to be a wonderful kind of customer service that I was not getting from our healthcare system.
Exactly.
But anyway,
and by the way, one other thing, Tim, before we get to AT, if you're not using ChatGPT or frontier model for a second opinion on any serious medical thing right now, you're being somewhat foolish. Doesn't mean you should treat it as the definitive authoritative source right now. But like, I had a friend who was hiking with his cousin in the Adirondacks. They went into a hospital. The hospital said, "Oh, you're fine. Here, take some antibiotics." And they're like, "It doesn't sound right." Went to ChatGPT. ChatGPT said, "Take your friend to a different hospital." Got to the different hospital, and they're like, "We're really glad you came in, because in 2 hours you'd be dead. We can save you now." Right? And so the second opinion thing is actually a very good thing. Now, it doesn't mean you immediately do it. You go seek a third opinion if it contrasts, but it's already part of the benefit we're getting today.
Yeah. So AT says, so if you're a DevOps or software engineer, you should just be letting the AI or LLM write your code and just think of architecture. I don't think that's correct. I don't think Reid does either. Speak to that.
No, look, it's what, look, architecture is one thing you should be doing, absolutely. But what you're going to be doing is, think of it as it's almost like you're managing a set of agents. And like, would you go, great, just do the work, I'm not going to pay attention? It's like, how your job as a manager is to say, hey, are we hitting the right kinds of performance? Are we answering the right kinds of questions? This is all the metacognition questions. Is there ways we could be doing this better? And you go, great, I see this code. Great, you produce code faster than a human can very quickly here. It has a bunch of capabilities because you've learned from a bunch of different stuff. Now, how do we make that more appropriate to us? How do we make sure we've answered all the questions that we need to answer? How do I get other agents to cross-check it and maybe get a higher function in terms of doing it, et cetera? That's part of where the metacognition comes in, not just architecture.
Yeah, I think it also is a matter of you have this new superpower, right? And just think, let's go back to say the rise of machines, physical machines. You could build bridges that you could not build before. You could build skyscrapers. You could dig deeper in the earth with these machines, right? And so you said, take the same metaphor and say, okay, what can I do with this new power that I have that I couldn't do before? The assumption that businesses are, most businesses are resource constrained. We can't do everything that we can imagine.
Yes.
And so one of the superpowers of AI, and if you're a developer, is that it allows you to say, wow, I couldn't try all my ideas, and now I can.
Yep, 100%.
Or I can try more of them. Even then, I think we'll find that we have even more ideas, and that's what we should be doing.
What I think most people don't realize is that they have limited themselves within the economic envelope, and therefore have limited their imagination. Right? Because it's like, well, these are all I could only get X done within a week, and so I've limited my scope of imagination of what the possibilities are, what things I might try, what things I could be possible to do. And I think now what we're doing is say, hey, we're going to have a much higher premium on re-broadening your imagination. It's a little bit like, for example, think before, trains or planes were invented, your imagination had to be within, well, what could happen within the local physical area? Now that you have those transport networks, you can have a much broader imagination about how commerce or trade or supply chains or all the rest of that stuff can work.
Yeah, and this kind of comes to another thing I want to talk about, which is this idea from AI as normal technology. Really important paper recently. And it's really about how ideas actually do come, and new technologies do actually come into fruition. And there's two parts to it. It's a study of what are the constraints that slow adoption, but it's also around why. So the adaptation of society and businesses is a learning process. And we are actually one of the biggest gateways to the transformation that's brought by AI is our learning, our speed of learning, our speed of adaptation. And that's things like, so many technologies, the capabilities were there long before their realization. Somebody could have thought of container shipping earlier, but they didn't, and so there's these new ideas that are going to reshape the future. And the real impact over time of AI isn't just from the raw technology, it's from the adaptation of that technology.
Yep. Presumably that siren's not coming for you.
All right. Yeah. FB says, many claim AI will reduce the need for human thinking.
Yep.
I argue the opposite. Thinking shifts level rather than vanishes. If you agree, then what future signals would show that higher level thinking has become the true economic bottleneck? And how would organizations reconfigure roles around it? Or if you do not agree, then why? That's a good question.
That's a great question. And by the way, I do agree that the notion of, look, part of what I think the superpower does and the tool gives you is it changes which parts of cognitive function are really important. So for example, like in history, prior to the printing press, memory was really important. Prior to the internet, memory was really important. Memory goes down, reasoning goes up as part of it because, just have to go be able to find the information versus remembering all of it on top. You have to remember, obviously, just like these models, you have to remember a certain amount in order to do inference. Similar with calculators, the ability to do, kind of like detailed long division matters less. And like, for example, with spreadsheets, the, kind of keeping double entry books matters less in that, but you then move to scenario planning, and you then move to risk analysis, you then move to other functions of math. I think it's the same kind of evolution in thinking and cognitive capabilities. And part of it is thinking a la, what we're gesturing at with kind of metacognition, context awareness, magic words, et cetera, is what are those kind of things about how to use these tools become the new, more valuable cognition. And,
Right.
By the way, it doesn't mean they're at loss. Like, for example, a lot of people thought there was loss from, kind of moving out of the world of like very deep memory and having all that memory in store being the most important thing you had in order to, having like on the repository. That's to some degree like the doctor example I was giving earlier, because, part of how doctors are trained is to have an intense knowledge base where they kind of re-up themselves by looking at papers and other kinds of things. And actually that knowledge base is now going to be, call it partially outsourced. It's not 100% outsourced, because how to reason it, how to use it, how to navigate it, how to cross-check it for accuracy, how to map it to an individual's case, how to help the individual be a patient advocate in a world of AI, all of those things maintain, and they need expertise in order to do it. But your expertise is more like, for example, I wonder if this is right here, and if this is right for this person, and I wonder if this is the way to look at it to make it work. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's right. But the question that I think was central here was, what future signals would show that higher level thinking has become the true economic bottleneck? And I think one of the signals I can immediately think of is, well, look at the value of some of the top AI scientists.
Yeah.
The people who are actually able to make the models better. They're literally, they're commanding more money than sports superstars or film actors. So I think that the rise of any kind of star power in intellectual disciplines, I think is a signal. And of course, you look at that. Another one, of course, is hedge fund managers, right? That's a kind of incredibly technology infused industry, and yet the people who are the superstars are the higher level thinkers who direct it.
And by the way, this is generally all of the knowledge work. I mean, like, part of the reason why you pay some lawyers a lot more than you pay other lawyers, part of the reason why you pay some medical specialists a lot more than you pay other medical specialists, et cetera.
Yeah, there is a risk, of course, that is a very unequal society, and the question is, how do we figure out how to make that more evenly distributed?
Yeah. Well, and you and I have talked about this. I am more concerned about kind of raising the average and the baseline, and making sure that's raising than keeping a pure equality standpoint. But I do think it's like, for example, one of the things I think is right is like, how do we make sure there's a healthy, kind of call it middle class and 80%, and increasing economic opportunity. I'm not as worried about the exact inequality numbers.
Yeah. So let me just talk a little bit about the question of whether AI is in a bubble state. And as you know, I'm a big fan of scenario planning. That is, you don't hold a firm position about the future. What you do is you actually try to stretch your mind to encompass very, very different possibilities, and then try to come up with a robust strategy that will survive either outcome. So for example, that there is, this, absolute, bust as a result of all this capital flowing in that will never pay back. AI doesn't, goes boom. The other is AI becomes some kind of singularity that replaces everything. And you go, what would you do that would survive either of those scenarios is the way we should be thinking about it. But what's your take on what are the outlines of the possible futures there?
So I completely agree with the scenario planning. And one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is they try to just kind of resolve on one scenario. And they use different ways to do it, like, precautionary principles. So we should resolve on a scenario. And part of how I try to say, look, precautionary principle is not a universal thing. Is if you say, hey, I'm really worried about getting in an accident driving from, Santa Rosa to San Francisco. So I'm going to plot out everything before I get on the road. I'm going to address every possible different concern, et cetera, et cetera. You're never going to get on the road. You're never going to drive to San Francisco. And so it's a kind of a question of how you kind of look at it. And I do think, like, part of what's amazing about AI technology is you say it's not 0% that we're going to create some kind of interesting superintelligence. I mean, we already have superintelligence that's very interesting, but, like, in the kind of like, oh my God, it's so amazingly outstrips our thinking that it's kind of hard to recognize from our point of view. We're like the ants to the new human intelligence. And it's not 0%. That's startling. But on the other hand, I don't think it's a very high percent, and I don't think it's soon, unlike a lot of the dialogue. And I think, a little bit to Tim's earlier point, there's actually, in fact, many more checkpoints and ability to navigate this as we're going down the road than, most of the doomsayers tend to do. Now, I do think that one of the certainties is a lot of economic disruption from the changeover of the tools at the speed at which organizations and work will be adopting them, which is slower than most of the technologies will have, but is faster than it has yet been in history. And so I think that the way to think about that as scenario planning is not so much to chart out an exact scenario as to think about, like, tools for adaptation, adapting to a set of specifics that we don't know is actually going to really how to play out.
Yeah, there's a great story about this. I may be misremembering it, but in Stuart Brand's book, I don't know if it's out yet, Maintenance, he opens with a story of a race, a sailing race around the world. And two of the leading contenders, one of them tried to, fortify his boat against every possible scenario that he could think would go wrong, and the other guy who basically brought the tools to be able to fix every possible thing that would go wrong. And those are two very different approaches.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah. So a couple of people are asking here about advice to, college graduates and junior developers, and people just coming into the workforce, what they should be doing.
Well, so I think this is a little bit to the AI proof versus AI optimized. I think one of the benefits that younger people, like I thought the earlier question of the harder transition question, saying this is a 58-year-old, is the 50-year-olds, not actually, in fact, I think the younger folks. Because the advice that I give when I do commencement speeches and other kinds of things say, look, fully embrace AI, and your pitch to going into the workforce is, I'm AI native, I can help you. Or like, I know how to, and I think that's the thing they should be doing. Now,
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see this in every new technology. It's like, it's the young people have figured out how to become TikTok stars, and now probably Sora, Sora 2, creators or YouTube, whatever it's been. It's like they invented that whole new field and created all the new jobs because they were just having fun. And I think that's true for me, throughout technology as well. I mean, it's why I love hackers and people are out there on the forefront, not just the entrepreneurs who are starting companies, but the people who are just in it for the fun of it, because it's so often the most creative time that really invents the future. And we think that everything starts with entrepreneurs, but I think it starts with people having fun with technology. And then some of them become entrepreneurs, but not all of them. But it's that culture of play that is at the heart of advancing innovation.
And the connection to that, what we were talking about earlier, which I 1,000% agree with, is that bounds of imagination, right?
Yeah.
And part of what, for example, the play and the being creative and playing with it and being early is that you actually have a broader range of imagination. And part of what the hardest thing, I think, for the 50-year-olds to do is to retrain and rebroaden their imagination and do that stretch for learning in it. And it's, obviously any 50-year-old that's showing up to an O'Reilly talk actually is ahead of the curve, because they're like, yeah, we know that. And here we are, we're doing it.
Yeah, well, I guess part of it, I think of a wonderful story about Samuel Johnson, the great, the guy who created the first dictionary of the English language. And he was on his tour of the Hebrides, and he met an old man younger than him sitting under a tree. And the man said, I thought nothing of climbing this tree when I was a boy. And Johnson, who was, late 70s, kicked off his shoes, climbed the tree, and said, I thought nothing of it now. And I at 71, I aspire to be that kind of person. And I have a great story about Freeman Dyson, too. His son, George, said he was like an adult when he was a child, and he was like a child when he was an adult. He was just never lost that joy of exploration.
By the way, anyway, I completely agree. But the other thing I would say as a 70-year-old is I'd go get a ladder.
Yeah, good point. I'm kind of torn, Reid, because this would be a perfect segue to the video that I want to show at the end. So everybody hold the point of this discussion, because the video that we're going to show is very relevant to it. But I want to ask you one more question, because we have a little bit more time, and that is about AI and physical computing.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to Kai-Fu Lee recently, noted AI investor in China, and he pointed out that a lot of the AI investment there is really going much more than in the U.S. into physical computing. We do hear about robots and self-driving cars, but a little bit in drug discovery. But he says there's just a ton of investment going in there. What do you think about the prospects for AI embodied in new physical world devices?
Well, obviously amazing. And it's one of the areas where I think the Chinese ecosystem is massively ahead of the rest of the world, including us. And I think it's And I think it's an important area. And so I think it's one of the things that we, the Europeans, everyone else should actually be investing in and figuring out. And like one of the simple ways of looking at it is BYD, which is going to be swarming the world with much cheaper, much higher quality EV cars, is already trying to figure out how to add like massive robotics to its already much cheaper manufacturing process. And I think that's part of, and so I think we need to be doing it. Now we need to be using what edges we have. Like, are we ahead or smarter in AI? How do we use that to help us with not just physical computing, but manufacturing, semiconductors, et cetera? Play to your strengths to add to your portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree with that. All right. Well, listen, let's, with that, I think we're going to have to wrap, but I want to share this wonderful video that Reid did recently, in which he uses AI to recreate a conversation with his younger self. And it's about this question of whether we should be pessimistic or optimistic about the future. Thank you very much for joining us. And now let's go over to virtual Reid.
Here's the thing. It feels like the world might not even be around long enough for me to finish college. We've got Reagan and Gorbachev staring each other down, nukes on red alert, and now they're saying there's a giant hole in the ozone layer? So how do you even plan a future when it feels like the world might not have one?
So yeah, that fear, unfortunately, totally real. Every generation inherits its own big fears and moments. In your case, nukes, existential dread; my era, climate, pandemics, tough political landscape, and definitely AI anxiety. But here's the deal. Leaning into the chaos is part of your job as the next generation. Progress doesn't come from certainty, it comes from uncertainty. There's a lot of parallels of technology uncertainty. The reflex, as a younger person, me as a young person, is to say, oh, the older generation, they're all a bunch of bozos, and look at the situation they gave us. But that's part of also where that perspective gives around, and now I can do this new different thing that's unique to me, to our generation, and what it is to do. But you have to learn that it's actually, in fact, technology is the thing that helps you shape the future.
Hang on, I need to take some notes.